Hello, I'm Liz Levatino. I'm the player experience lead at Episode Interactive. You're probably here because you either have user-generated content on your platform or you're working with creators. We found that at Episode, Generation Z presents unique challenges, and they are pretty different from other demographics. For those of you who don't know, Episode is the world's largest platform for interactive mobile entertainment. UGC makes up the bulk of our platform. Quick note, it will come up later, we allow users to write, direct, and upload their own custom art to our platform. If their stories do well enough, they can also get paid. We have over 3 billion episodes watched. Our primary audience is females aged 13 to 25, and we have over 90 million installs. For this talk, I'm going to be focusing almost exclusively on our creator community. We have over 6 million creators registered on our writer portal. That is the set of tools we have released to allow our users to create their own stories. To give you a little bit of context, they have published over 70,000 stories. Internally, our team has made about 100. A large part of what I do is monitoring and curating this content. It's a big job. Our Instagram community is over 800,000, and we also run and maintain episode forums, which we use as a resource for our authors and also as a way for us to gain insight into how they use our tools, and it's our primary mouthpiece for communicating with them. When it comes to creating content guidelines, we have learned quite a bit. Our first lesson here is create the clearest guidelines possible. A large part of this will be how much will your legal team let you do? When setting guidelines, we try to balance what our community wants with what our legal advisors say and as well as what our product goals are. This is most likely going to be a push-pull between what is clear to your creator community and what your legal team is comfortable with you spelling out. I think it's helpful to go into this knowing that no matter how clear you are, there's always going to be someone who's going to try and game your guidelines. When we sat down to write our guidelines, we asked ourselves 4 questions. The first one was, who is our audience? For us, it's those lovely teen girls and young women. We also took these questions to like a multi-departmental task force. We worked with our product team, our community, our social marketing team, as well as our internal story creators. The other question to ask yourself, what kinds of content do you want your creators to produce? We have a philosophy behind our content platform that pretty much guides everything we do, which is that we want to empower our users to tell their stories. And in our case, this means making space for creators to tell stories, the fun, lighthearted, romantic tales that they love, but also things that deal with more difficult subjects like sex, drugs, violence, and abuse. Our current guidelines exist to help our creators tell these stories, but in a way that is appropriate for our 13+ app rating. Another really important question to ask yourself, what don't you want your creators to produce? For us, at Episode, we have 3 things that will result in an instant removal from the platform. Sexually explicit content, anything that is fan fiction or celebrity-oriented, and anything that infringes on copyright, trademark, intellectual property, or someone else's authorship. The last question we ask ourselves is, what kind of content do we want them to produce? What do we want to see? Turns out, your users will tell you. What you see here is a representation of search terms from the app for 60 days. Obviously, sex and pregnancy are really big for our audience. So, because of this, we've had to develop pretty robust standards about what kinds of sexual content and how explicit they can be on our platform. We've also had to develop rules around how old does a pregnant character have to be? What about ages of consent? Some of the fun things we get out of these searches is a lot of really interesting stories. Things like Pregnant by a Nerd, My Best Mistake, My Charming Vampire, My Brother's Best Friend, My Best Friend's Brother, and Billionaire Baby Daddy. The next component of this is when you're creating your guidelines is that make sure your staff are clear on what the guidelines are. For us, this meant that our story, marketing, community, social media, and support teams all had to be unified in terms of what is okay and what is not okay for our app. The story you see pictured here is called Loving Bad. This is an episode branded story that was published before we had really kind of like nailed down our guidelines. And it ended up featuring some excessive violence and a couple of explicit sex scenes. This was challenging for us because the community started referencing this story as like a benchmark of what they could and could not do on the platform. It became this like, well, if the episode is doing it, I guess I can too. After the community outcry around this story, we ended up creating a visual content guide, which is what you see here. The murdery scene was actually what was in Loving Bad, and we determined that this is not something we want in our story. So we pulled scenes from our stories, from user stories, and we threw together this whole doc that spells out exactly why this is okay, why it's not okay, how could you change it to make it all right. This is regularly referenced now internally, and it's part of our onboarding process for new staff. Lesson 2, enforcing your guidelines. This has actually been, I think, one of the trickiest parts of monitoring content on episode. And we frame it to the extent that recognize that your creators are making a significant emotional investment in your product, and that investment is valuable to you. And it is possible to salvage content and preserve your creator's investment. We do quarterly community pulse surveys. We ask 4 questions to users in our app that basically focus on how into episode are you? The first question is, do you feel that you belong to the episode community? 75% of players say yes, they feel like they belong to a group of episode users. And the second question is one that I think is the most interesting. Episode is a part of who I am, true or false? 68.5% of people define themselves by their involvement in the episode community. Who they are, episode is part of who they are. The content that they create is often deeply personal and can form a huge part of their identity. Cultivating this kind of relationship is super valuable for our platform, but it also means that when you pull a user's story, emotional reactions are likely. You are potentially deleting their baby, their art, or in the cases of authors who are paid, you're deleting their livelihood. Because their investment and commitment to us is so intense, we try to mirror that back to them in the way that we enforce our guidelines. Our goal, and we've publicly stated this to our creators numerous times, is that we want to keep as many stories as possible on the app and that we're committed to working with our authors. So much so that we have spent weeks going back and forth with authors, editing their stories, and right now our record for longest notice to edit is a document that was 40 pages long. So we're really committed to helping them keep their content. Your content guidelines are going to get broken a lot. That's just part of it. We should all plan for that to happen. To give you some context, in the last 60 days, we've reviewed 193 stories for content violations, 97 of which were permanently removed from the platform. The remainder were suspended, edited, and returned to being live in the app. Of those 97 that were permanently removed, 60 of these were because they were plagiarized, infringing on copyrights, or were fan fictions or celebrity type things. Our approach to enforcing our content guidelines is to think scalpels and not hammers. The more precise and targeted we can be about removing content that doesn't fit our guidelines, the less traumatic it is for our authors. We specifically do not use the word ban when we communicate with them. In our community, that has a really severely negative connotation that frankly just freaks them out a lot. So instead we used softened language like removed, indefinitely suspended. This helps us kind of control the emotional outcry that comes with a notice to edit. We also have set up tiers of offenses and tiers of consequences. For example, someone who inadvertently has a trademarked logo in some of their custom art is much different than a person who's trying to write Twilight on episode. Most stories that are found or reported for breaking guidelines are suspended for content things. We have tiers of consequences. We do have sort of what's like the equivalent of a soft ban and a ban hammer. Our soft ban is called suspend. This allows us to pull our content from the app. It is not in the trending sections, it's not on the featured shelves, but the story is still searchable, it's still shareable, and authors get to keep their reads, which is important if they're in the payment program. Our ban, or permanent removal, it completely wipes the story from the app. They lose their reads. It's pretty devastating. We also focus on developing tools for content and tools for accounts, and that this allows for really precise cuts. So that's a distinction between the way they produce content on the platform and their ability to be on the platform. What you see here is a tool that we recently launched. Authors submit their own art to be used in their stories, and until recently, it was a straight up approve or disapprove. But with this new tool, we can point out to an author exactly which guideline they're breaking and what, if anything, they can do. What you see here is a screenshot from Netflix's 13 Reasons Why. Copyright, not allowed on the platform. We also, in keeping with this whole tools for accounts, after enough content violations, not only is a creator's content removed, but we can start restricting their access to the platform. So this means their ability to use the forums, their ability to write on the portal, and also their ability to read other stories on the app. And it's basically the equivalent of a timeout. If you're not going to play by the rules, you don't get to play at all. Lesson 3, connect with your creators. Our demographic is made up of very creative young people, and this presents us with both a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges. Chances are, when you're engaging your community where they live, that they live outside of your walled garden, of your domain. Every game, every platform has their intentional communities. These are spaces for your users that you build, you control. But there's also a fair amount of what we call spontaneous or organic communities. For us, that ended up being Instagram, Ask.fm, and Musical.ly, also fan communities that they've created themselves. We have a very large following on our Instagram account, the @episodeofficial, but it was increasingly difficult to connect with our creators in a meaningful way because the channel was just too broad and it was too much noise. So recently we launched what you see on the far right, which is episode creators. The following is much smaller. We're only around 18,000, but the connection is much more meaningful and much more personal. So far, this channel has been super useful for cultivating feedback directly from our authors, as well as communicating creator-specific news or updates that our general users may not really care about. You can also use this to create a bridge between the community-created hubs and the hubs that you own. The @episode channel is where we talk to them. The other Instagram account you see featured here is Episode News, which is basically the TMZ equivalent of the episode world. They use this to talk to us. And then we have @episode creators, which is where we have a dialogue that goes both ways. Because you have this close connection with your creators, it can present opportunities as well as challenges. One of the things that we were faced a lot with early on were these change.org petitions. They felt like it was a really good way to get our attention. Both the requests you see here, to bring back the story Enslaved and also to remove sexualized ads in stories, they both came from change.org, and they're effectively asking for exactly the opposite thing. Enslaved was a story about human sex trafficking that we removed for having sexually explicit content. So even if they're using the same channel to communicate with you, it can often be difficult to sort of sort through the noise or to come to a consensus. Hashtag campaigns are another thing we get a lot. What you see here are two of my favorite hashtag campaigns. They're like lovely and wonderful. So we have hashtag Notice Me Episode, which is this one right here on the left. This has over 3,600 dedicated posts on Instagram. And what you see here is a piece of our episode art that a user customized to make this image. And we featured it on our main episode channel. And the text is probably hard to read, but she's basically saying, "Oh my God, crying emoji, I'm screaming, you've made my day." Like, the joy in this girl's heart is fantastic. The other one that you see is hashtag episode love. Same thing. Like, the author is just, I can't imagine my life without this app. So these kinds of hashtag campaigns they show us the connection that our users have to us. Featuring these posts, I refer to it as episode's blessing. It is a very powerful tool that we have, and we try to use sparingly. These were some not so happy hashtag campaigns. What you see here on the left is hashtag bring back the arrangement. This was the most widely read story we've ever banned. It had 10 million reads. And when we pulled it down, both the author and her users got pretty mad at us. What you can see on this chart is that there can often be kind of a cascade effect between what happens on social media will then spill over into your support staff. So the blue line is Instagram posts, and the corresponding red line is support tickets related to this event. Now, the spike was pretty significant, but it also drops off very, very quickly. The second one is hashtag bring back Emily. This is one of the authors who had to go on that timeout. She had had several content violations in a period of short months, so we suspended her from the platform for a week. Again, you can see the corresponding spikes in tickets and Instagram posts. And when we did this, she and her followers got really angry, which leads me to my last point, lesson 3.5, prepare to become public record. There is no such thing as a private conversation with Generation Z. Everything you say to a user via social media, email, support tickets, anything can and will be used publicly. So Emily and her users ran a campaign against us. The author shared every email that we had ever sent her. And this resulted in a huge backlash from her over 50,000 Instagram followers, which resulted in our staff getting death threats, being called names, and campaigns organized to have staff members fired. It was pretty bad, and it went on for days. But the flip side of this is that they also share the really positive news. When we select stories to be featured in the app, we send the authors an email letting them know that we're going to do this. And they share those on social media as well. I think it's important to remember that Gen Z is hyper-connected, they are tech-savvy, and whatever they choose to share or make public will travel quickly. It moves at the speed of a DM. I think this separates them from millennials or Generation Y, in that Generation Z expects you, as a company, to respond to them. If you ignore them, if you don't answer, they get angry. They demand to have a dialogue with you. So, in light of this, for us it's become a balancing act between connecting with our community while also maintaining an appropriate professional distance. So, takeaways. Create guidelines that meet the needs of your product and your content creators. When enforcing your guidelines, work with your creators. They are your most engaged users and are valuable to your product. Connect with your creators where they live. Gen Z has different expectations than other demographics, and you need to adjust accordingly. All right, that's all I got.
It was really interesting to me to hear that you can't say that some content is banned or else you're going to trigger your audience.
Yeah, so we in our first, we use macros. We're operating our support through Zendesk. And the first emails that we started at, oh, your story has been banned. And the response we got to those were just heartbreaking. People were like, I'm crying, you don't understand, this is my life, how can you do this to me, what can I get back? And as a community manager and someone who works in player experience, that's my players having a really bad time, which I don't want. So something as simple as changing a word, your story has been removed.
So what else did you learn triggers Generation Z? Because and what resources did you use to find out? Trial and error? Did you?
So, turns out you don't have to look very hard to find out something that will upset them. They're pretty good at letting you know. We have had very thoughtful conversations with our users about everything from how we depict things like rape on the app, ethnic and racial diversity. They bring their concerns to us.
Now, how often do their concerns conflict within their own demographic?
Pretty regularly.
How do you resolve that?
Like every concern ever is that way. So that becomes, we have, we call them the Brain Trust. It's a group of individuals who work on the team. We draw from all the major departments, marketing, product, social media. And basically we get together in a room and we talk about what we think is the right course of action. And if it's a dead tie that concerns our marketing, the marketing director decides. If it involves player experience, it's me. I am the decider.
Now, once you decide, where you're going to land on a specific policy, particularly one that's been a little bit controversial in the community, how transparent? I know you're transparent about it, but how transparent are you?
We strive to be as transparent as possible.
So you discuss, for example, the details of the options you chose not to implement.
No, not that far.
Okay, not that transparent.
They are, the phrase we use in the office is that, they are woke AF. They are not dumb. They're very engaged. A lot of them are very well educated. And so, if you're too intentionally vague, they'll call you out on it. And, they smell bullshit, they'll tell you. So we try not to tell them what we ruled out, but talk about how we reached the conclusion that we've decided to implement.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Liz, thank you very much.
All right.
I really appreciate your time with us today.
Thank you.